seconds. 9, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, as we had a change in our schedule, as you all know, we're not going to have another input followed by a workshop, but rather maybe a fade out of this intense day, and maybe a fade into the final phase tomorrow. And this is done by Sonja and Jascha. They come from the Institut of Partizipativ Gestalten, which is Institute for Participatory Design, located in Oldenburg. Sonja has a background in landscape architecture. Jascha is a sociologist and a philosopher. Is that correct? Yeah. And with their institute, they're both founders of this institute, and they have planned, designed, and facilitated numerous collaborative design processes with municipalities, institutions, organizations. And the knowledge and the skills they have, they want to share with us tonight. We as a foundation already took great advantage of their work, and I'm sure you all will do. Yes. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Well, Ralph, thank you very much. Actually, you took the first 5 minutes of my talk from me, which is introducing ourselves. What else is there to say? Probably not much. Sonja and I met when we were both involved in permaculture design. That was sort of, for a couple of years, a really important subject for both of us, which brought us into sustainability design and to design for eco-villages and ecological projects. And from there on, we said, well, this is all very well and fine to do this kind of work, but we'll only do it with these people who are fond of these kind of projects. And in order to really have an impact, this kind of approach of designing with people for their own context, for their own surroundings, for their own neighborhoods, we have to introduce this methodology into sort of a mainstream context because we really wanted to know if it works to work this way. That was 10 years ago, with everyone, and not just with white, educated, green, left alternative people. So we founded the Institute for Participatory Design. We gave ourselves this academic name, and our idea was to have something like a Trojan horse. Like this is this serious academic institution, and they help us solve problems. But of course, what we would do was based still on ecological design ideas. And from there, we developed our own methodology. And today, I would like to introduce you to some elements of what we think and how we work. And the talk is called Cultivate Your Social Design, or Design Your Cultivation, because this whole thing of how to cultivate what you have actually designed, usually for us designer, gets lost in the process. I mean, we're really good in having new ideas, we're good at transformation, we're good at change, we're good at dynamic processes, but when it comes to long cultivation of what our products or services or social constructs are, often this is where many projects fail. So yeah, you told a little bit what we do, or what we did for the last 10 years with the Institute of Participatory Design. We started with rural projects. So for a couple of years we supported and facilitated initiatives and citizen groups in the rural areas of Germany. Different projects at different places, but all rural. And that was quite an experience for us. It was important for us to learn to work exactly in these environments. In Germany, there are a lot of problems in rural areas. I don't have to tell you about it. And so this was important work for us. Then from there, or what we did there was especially starting, for example, citizen businesses, or we helped to save kindergarten, schools, public swimming pools, where the state or the local authorities couldn't find the money or the power or the energy to keep these places. And with local initiatives, we tried, and not only tried, but we saved those. And from there on, we went to large cities. We worked in Hamburg, in Berlin, and Frankfurt, and on themes like, for example, in Frankfurt, we worked on schooling development for the whole city of Frankfurt, 70,000 pupils in Frankfurt. We worked with over 500 people for a whole year to develop concepts of how to get better schooling in the city of Frankfurt. These are kind of projects we do. And at the moment, we also do a little bit of research, for example, for the Umweltbundesamt, that's the sort of main environmental federal bureau in Germany, on how to include people in important political participatory processes. And now the latest project, one of the latest projects was to look at trade negotiation processes and how to make them more transparent and participatory, if that is possible at all. So just to give you an overview of our work, and this is from the subjects, our work is quite diverse, but where it's not diverse, or where we think we are the experts, is we know how to bring people with very different perspectives and different knowledges together to work on these solutions, because it's not us who design the solutions, it's the people we enable to design the solutions. Now, when I came here with Sonja, with the train, of course we prepared for these days here, and I was pondering about the term social design a lot, because as a sociologist and a philosopher, of course, I have to question terms, and the term social design is strange, because usually you talk about product design or service design, and social design is different, like how the term is made up, because social is not sort of what you actually design, or I hope it is not. Because if you would society, there are only a couple of people who tried to design whole societies, and that were always totalitarian regimes. And I believe this is not what you are all up to. So my understanding is, or the ideas I made up for myself with this term, is that you probably, if we talk about social design, it's more about designing social solutions, or designing with a social vision, or designing by trying to get some social impact, or even design as a social practice. But it's not society we design, or is it? I don't know. No, it's not, of course. It would be quite a hybrid to design society, because society is so complex, and it's above all, it's dynamic. And to believe that you could design something so complex in constant change and dynamics would be a bit over the top, I feel. And it would probably not be possible without major damage to the system you're trying to do. So that was one thought I came here with, and the other was actually a thought Sonia had, which we discussed a lot over the last 2 days, was are we actually supporting sort of the neoliberal hyper-capitalistic state with the kind of work we do? Because most projects here in these last days are really tasks the state should provide for, in my opinion. And because it's not doing that anymore, because it's saving money on all kind of social issues, people like us are designing solutions with our own money, with our own energy, with our own efforts. And I wonder where that leads to. And if one of the major tasks we have to do, or we have to find out about, is can we not sort of turn this against this dynamic back again? So can we not design solutions for the state rather than parallel to the state, for example? Or trying to be innovative about how the state, a welfare state maybe even, could work in future. With that in mind, I want to come to our main subject, or my main subject here, cultivate your social design. Because in the word cultivate there's culture, of course. Yeah, it's a very nice root in this word, culture. And cultivate your social design means we find solutions for social problems, but it's not done by finding the solution. What we really have to do is to find ways of implementing them in culture, which is trying to find ways of implementing our designs, our solutions, our innovations in a way that they become part of everyday's culture, that people start to own these solutions, that they can adapt to them, that they can use them in their everyday life, and maybe even be able to change them and alter them on their own. Because we as designer want actually, if we have done our job, we want to draw back, and the people should be able and empowered to work with what we have done and keep on designing for their own environments and benefits. So now I'm a philosopher, and so at the end of the day, you might excuse me that I'll give you a few more terms and differentiations I want to make. And the idea is that at the end of this talk, you have an idea of how to cultivate your design solutions and innovations, and what this means in terms of your process. And the first differentiation in terms I would like to make is that between procedures and processes. Now, this might be a bit alien to you, and you might not find an easy access to the definition I try to give you now. But I really would like to ask you to think about it, and maybe for the next 2 or 3 days at least, try to work on this concept and see if that makes sense for you. Because for us it makes a lot of sense, and for us this differentiation between procedures and process has made our design lives much, much easier. Because by this differentiation we know where we can do something and where we can't. Now, a procedure for us is something we can actually design. It's a step-by-step approach to achieve something. For example, a social design. To do this, we need a procedure. For example, a procedure of steps of methods. Like if you think about the last days, you probably can make up what the procedure was. It was basically the time frame given us by the Hans Sauer Stiftung, and of course in the slots where you did your project work, the methods, the methodological steps you took for yourself. And all this together gave you a pretty direct linear time frame you could work on. And usually procedure looks something like this. You have a timeline. This is really big. I have to get used to the drawing here. This is the first time I do this. So you have a timeline, and then you have probably some phases. And in between you make some decisions. We show this by this kind of thing. And then you have events or methods you do along the line. And that's your procedure. And that's how you work with it. That's a simple way of putting your methodological steps you work on in order. Now the process for us is something completely different. And I believe that probably you will use the word process for both of what I described now. You probably use process also for what I call procedure, because that's usually how I know what's done. Now the process for us is the dynamic in time and space which will happen anyway. It doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what methods you use, what steps you take. The process is the dynamic of what is happening in a current situation. For example, the processes of the last 2 days were you're trying to understand the difficult subject from some other part of Europe. You were probably having some difficulties understanding the challenge. You were discussing it. Maybe you went into crisis and didn't know where to go next. And then you became really depressed and needed a beer. And then your mother called you and you got really annoyed about that and had a bad sleep and a bad dream. And next morning, everyone was smiling and really nice to you, and you had a fresh start. All this kind of stuff, that's the process. Yeah? And the process is influenced by all kind of things, like everything you can think of. And the process usually looks more like something like this. And there's not only one process, but usually there's a personal process, there's a group process, there's a process of the whole context around you. Everything and everyone has its process, and that makes process really difficult and sometimes chaotic, but also interesting and alive. And that's where flow is, that's where creativity is, and so on and so on. Now, this is happening in all processes, in every context. And in order to work with these processes, you need procedures. There's no other way for us than to build procedures to work with this kind of chaotic flow. That's the only way we can think of. I mean, we can try to adapt to that, then we have no procedure at all. We just go with the flow. But most of us use a kind of procedure. They plan their steps, their methods, what to do next, what comes after that. Like every methodology you talk about, for example, design thinking, offers you a kind of phase by phase, step by step approach. Sometimes it's more complex, sometimes it's more easy, but that is a distinction we make. And it helps us in many ways because we feel by understanding the process, we can much better design a procedure And in the procedure, we'll be able to find our design. Now, there are some basic qualities in processes we find, well, not always, it's a model. I'm just giving you a model now. And as all models, they don't reflect reality, they're just a pattern to understand reality, but reality is often different than the model. Still, the model helps to understand. And we find most design processes follow sort of through three kind of qualities. And we draw them a little bit like this, like a tree, you could say. Or the Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci, like the feet and the arms and the head. I like to draw this in a kind of circular way. And there are three qualities. You start here. This is what you all have been done. You do your research. You try to understand the context. It's like if you put the roots down in the earth and you try to understand everything, you suck everything up from everything, the nutrients, the water, everything you can get to understand your challenge. This is here. The quality is emergence. And usually what you do is you do it by what we call resonance. So basically, when you start a project, you get into resonance with everything which is important to this project, with the people, with the context, with the concepts. It can be cognitive, it can be emotional, it can be on all levels. But the thing is, you try to connect, you try to understand the whole range of information which is in the project, in the field, we call it. And the more you connect and the more you get your roots into the earth and collect information, the denser the quality of the process becomes, because you feel somehow this is all too much. There's too much information, too much difficulty. The resources are not big enough. The team is bad. I don't know, everything becomes really complicated, and this is the second phase here in the middle. And the quality is transformation. And what will happen mostly is some sort of crisis. You had a crisis the last 2 days? Major or minor crisis? Yeah, good. You should. It's part of a creative process to have a crisis. Yeah, when we started facilitating groups, we always thought we were making things, we didn't do our job in a good way because groups fell into crisis, and later we understood crisis is an important part in every creative process. In fact, crisis, the word comes from the realm of medicine. And it means that the point of crisis is the point where an ill person either dies or gets healthy again. It's a point of decision. The crisis is a point of decision. It's the point where all the information is very dense at one sort of point here in the middle, like a singularity. Everything is here. You understood everything which is part of the project. And now you have to make a decision, and that puts you into crisis. You have to make the decision to go this way, that way, choose that path or choose that path. And after that, usually what happens, if you really dig down into the crisis, and if you really get to the root of your own crisis and understand why you are in this crisis, and if you work on that, what will happen next is you get out here in something like this explosion of ideas. And that's what's called emergence. Emergence is to dive, and this means to dive in, and emergence means to dive out. It's to dive out. And that, of course, is the phase of co-creation. Now, in our understanding, this is basically what happens in more or less every sort of design project, in every workshop, in every situation where people are creative to solve a solution, to find a new solution to a given problem. And that's it. And nice, we had a good workshop, now we go all home. What will happen with the results? You know, you had this great workshop, great group process, everything fine, huge ideas. I mean, you now know after this workshop, 2 days of social design workshop, you know how to solve the world. And now you drive home, what will happen? You know, nothing. Mostly nothing, or very little. Maybe there's 1 or 2 persons who start thinking further. So this basically, this is what most designers are very comfortable with. It's nice. Here are the research guys and analytical guys who really dive into it and get to fill everything out and claim all the data. And then there's the people who really love the crisis and the transformation and this adrenaline of, yeah, wow, we don't know where to go and what will happen next, but this is great, this is transformation, this is change. And you have these people with all these great ideas, post-its everywhere on every wall. You know, that's fine. We know these people, they're here in the room. But that's not it. Culture will not change, society will not change if we do these workshops over and over again. I mean, we can do thousands of them and nothing will happen. Absolutely nothing. So what's the next? The next thing, of course, is cultivation. And there are 3 examples of cultivation. One is what you cultivate, of course, that's where you know it from. You can cultivate plants, like a flower. Like, how do you cultivate a plant? Does anyone know? Huh? Yeah, that's when you plant it. But how do you cultivate it? Yeah, water, for example, you pick the weeds and you water it, like give it love. Yeah, exactly. So this is the farmer and he waters the plants. That's cultivation. Yeah, caring. Like every day he goes out there again and again and he waters the plant for a whole year, from spring to autumn. He does it. That's cultivation. Now, secondly, who is children here? Everyone? Anyone? Children? How many? 2, 3? Yeah. So this is a like 1 parent, 2nd parent, 3rd parent. Yeah, don't draw cliches on walls like this. So, and a child. That's cultivation. Not making the child, but helping it to grow up, like every day. Yeah, changing the diapers, get into a shop, buying stuff, getting back home, fixing the food, bringing it to school, getting it back again, bringing it to school, next day, day after day after day after. That's cultivation. And third, if you have a project or a business, yeah, it's not about being creative, having a new great business idea every day. It doesn't help to have a new great business idea every day. What is needed is to have one good and to cultivate it, or 2 or 3, but not too many, and cultivate it. I have really difficulties doing that. and cultivate these, which makes getting some profit out of it, or caring for your team, having routines to do this again and again and again. That's cultivation as well. And the way I speak about it, you may notice that I'm not very easy with cultivation, and probably most sitting here are not either, which is the first deep insight. Probably it needs different people than us. But without these people, our work is worth very little. Yeah, we need these people who cultivate. Now, where's the cultivation? Well, we expanded our nice model here. By the way, we call it Field-Process-Modell, just to give you the name. And we asked ourselves, what happens here with all our good ideas and concepts and prototypes and products and services? What happens at this point? Well, there's this long phase, and it reconnects somehow. Just draw it here as well. And in the end, it makes something like, have you ever seen the magnetic field of the Earth? This is something like it, or a magnetic field, after all. It looks a little bit like that. Even the spiral here went on. And this bit here, from here to there, that's what we would call cultivation. Now, the first question for us is, how do we get into this orbit? Because there are two other things which can happen. If you come after, let's say, a social lab, workshop for 2 days. The first thing is, what can happen is, you have a great idea, but somehow it's not so great, and you get bored, and you don't really believe in it. Done. The second thing which can happen is, this is such a great idea, it's amazing. Yeah, it gets out there, and no one can reach it anymore. It's just unrealistic for anyone to work with it. So what you have to do is, you really have to get into this trajectory and find this orbit here. So there has to be the right amount of energy behind an idea. Not too little, not too much. It has to be a realistic solution, a realistic innovation. Being innovative, but maybe not too much. Being bold, but maybe not too much. But also not too little, because that'll bring you here. So this is the first lesson. At this point, after the workshop, how do you get out of the workshop and find the right amount of energy, the right amount of effort to really get into this orbit of cultivation? Like, what do you need to do? I mean, many people should write down the next steps, assign some tasks, whatever. You know all that. You do that. If you're good, you do that. Sometimes it's enough, sometimes it's not. But this is where you really need to go to. The second thing is, you can prepare for this. And this is something we can do in all 3 phases here. You can already prepare for cultivation when you do your research. You can do research on, how was this done before? How did the system work for the last 20 years before it came into crisis? Because maybe you can learn something from it, to the bad or to the good, it doesn't matter, but you can learn something from it. So your research can go into thinking this phase of cultivation from the beginning, from your research with your process, in your process, like thinking about it, researching it, interviewing people, how they did it, what did work, what did not work in everyday's life later on. Then, if you're in crisis and if you have to make some fundamental design decisions, of course, you should take cultivation into account. You should take into account in your decision what might be good innovative solutions which are also which might also be successful in the cultivation phase. And of course, this is the most important because it's the phase just before the cultivation. If you co-create and innovate, please innovate the steps into cultivation as well. It's not enough to have a product, but you have to have an idea how to promote this product, how to communicate it, how to sell it. Just to have a great product is not good enough often. Or if you work for social environment and you have this great social idea, well, it's not good enough if you don't have the people who understand it and who implement it in their lives. It's not good enough. So you have to innovate for that as well, while you're doing all these post-its, not just on the products, on the services, but also on how will they use it, how will they cultivate it, and can you give them any help to do that? And believe you can. And that's this bit here for. Let's see. Let's put cultivation here again. By the way, I'm not giving you any examples from our projects because I'll ask you for some examples in a couple of minutes and then I'll give you some examples. So that's why I didn't talk about our project so far. Now I'm using this bow here and I'm just putting it up here, like this. That is the cultivation phase, okay? First thing we learned about cultivation, it's all about structure, and if I've referred to the talk this morning, it's about structure and practice, basically. So you have to think about building structures for practice. And let's just assume this is a kind of structure, let's say a bridge or something. What kind of structures do you have to design for? Well, more or less all structures. Spatial structures, we heard it in the talks, in both talks basically. You can care about spatial structures. What are spatial structures? Well, rooms like this, for example. Without a room like this, arena like this, it would be more difficult for the Impact Hub to cultivate certain event formats they want to cultivate. So building structures, spatial structures is a way of caring for cultivation. Communication. So communication structures is a second way of caring for cultivation. Like, how do people communicate? It's not just enough to put an iPhone in everyone's hand. Maybe you have to find events or rituals where they communicate in a certain kind of way. Like in your family, maybe you have something like a family council. Or in your company, you have, as we have in our institute, you have a check-in and check-out at the beginning of the week and the end of the week, where you don't speak about the work, but about how you feel or what your fears are with the project or what you learned. You know, you have to create for these forms of communication. They don't happen by themselves. That is, in our opinion, that's the main mistake we always do again and again and again. We as well, we assume that as long as the idea is good, people will pick it up and will use it. They won't, because they have their habits. And in order for these habits to change, their culture to change, we have to make offers. We have to make offers, and we have to train them in how to use it. So educational structures on how to use a new system, how to use a new product, how to use a new service is part of it. You might have designed this great service, maybe you even have written a manual, but if you don't teach people so that they really use it in everyday's life, and that they are even willing to teach others as well, because they find it's beneficial to their everyday's life, you will fail with your new service. So educational structures, and even something like, coming back to my what I said at the beginning, governmental structures, policy structures. Like, why shouldn't we design in a way where we say, look, dear government, it's nice that you don't pay anymore for social housing, let's say, but we have an innovative design how we want to live in future, and here's what you, dear government, can do to make this happen. So thinking about policies, thinking about contracts, all this, we heard this in the talk this morning as well, about structures is part of what you can do. And even, let's say it, spiritual, yeah, like giving things sense and meaning. Let's just put it like that, giving meaning and sense, a sense of purpose to things. That's about telling good stories, about narratives, not only narratives about how cool your product is, but also how it helps in everyday lives and why it is important that people can connect to it. And find out about it. So, structures of cultivation. How do you do that? How do you build a structure of cultivation? Now we get into the methodological part, and since you will not work today anymore on your projects, you'll have to keep this in mind until tomorrow. One methodology we like to use a lot for all kinds of things is the pattern language approach by Christopher Alexander. Has anyone heard about pattern languages? Yeah, I'm sure you. We'll have to talk. Pattern languages. Christopher Alexander was a mathematician in Oxford and later an environmental architect in Berkeley, and he came up with ideas of pattern languages. He, as an architect, his question was, how can I as an architect build structures which are alive? He called it being alive or aliveness. He also called it quality without a name. Like, he wasn't referring to beautiful or sustainable or good. He was referring to structures which are alive, which make us feel alive, powerful, energized, whatever you want to call it. And he was thinking about this problem, and he said, well, the way we do things nowadays, by sort of industrial production, doesn't make things alive. We don't feel alive in industrially produced environments. But still, we want to replicate our knowledge. So what he did was, he observed design solutions which had the same quality, and he said there is a pattern behind it. For example, if you go to Sweden and drive along the countryside, you'll notice the Swedish houses. And you will recognize a Swedish house as being a Swedish house because of what? Red. What?
The color.
The color. They're red, for example. And what else?
Shape.
They have a certain shape. The materials, yeah. They're wooden. They have white frames. They often have a sort of entrance with a small roof on top of it. these are all patterns. Not one Swedish house is exactly the same like the other. It's not like they come out of a fabrication line. But you can see that they're a Swedish house because they have certain design solutions which are similar, even though every individual solution is different. And this, for Alexander, is the secret of design solutions which are alive. He says, there is a pattern, there is a sort of design solution behind it, but the individual product is different. There's individuality, like the tree. You can see a beech tree, a beech tree, a beech tree, a beech tree. They don't look all the same. You can recognize them as beech trees, but they're all individuals. And that is what he calls a pattern. There are patterns, and we can recognize them, and we can work with them. So, and he was a mathematician, and he made a simple sort of form. He said a pattern is basically, in terms of a formula, is a challenge or a problem in a given context, and for that you'll find a solution, like a design solution. That's a pattern. It's a design solution for a given challenge in a context. Now, the context is always a bit difficult, but in the end, it looks a little bit like this. There's a title to each pattern. There's a field for a visualization. It can be a picture, it can be a scribble, it can be a logo, whatever. And then he says there's a challenge. Then usually, it's not on this sheet, but usually there is a description of the context in which this challenge happens. For example, in Sweden, the context, why are the houses red? Does anyone know? Well, it's a color which is based on iron oxide that gives the red color, because they have a lot of iron oxide. There are some mines where they get that out of it. And they found out that if you pour this iron oxide in some solution and put it on your wood, it will last longer in the climate. So that's the design solution. It's not because they all like red. I mean, if they would paint it green and blue and whatever. No, it's a design solution in a given context. In Italy, where you don't have this climate, where you don't have iron oxide a lot, it doesn't make sense to paint your house with iron oxide. So the solution in Sweden would be to paint your house with iron oxide colors. So just to give you an example, how this can be applied to cultivation, like patterns. For example, in our office, and here as well, and in many other places as well, in family homes, you have a place for eating. Communal eating, for Christopher Alexander, is a pattern. Because communal eating is a solution to a given challenge. The solution to the challenge of how to bring a small group of people who meet every day but are all busy doing something 2 or 3 times a day together, to sit together and exchange. The design solution is, well, you have a spatial place for communal eating, because that's where people meet, at work, in a family, whatever. That's a design solution, and that's a pattern. But the pattern is the abstract form. It's communal eating. The single design solution would be our kitchen and our IPG's office, or the space in Frontier in the Impact Hub, or your dinner table at your flat. Those are all individual sort of design solutions of this general pattern. Okay, that's a bit abstract, but it gets more concrete. What I do now is I pass this around. And that's the last task you have to do for today, I promise. I'll pass this around, and I will ask you to find like just sit with 2 or 3 people, so they have a small conversation, to find 2 or 3 patterns for cultivation. And just to give you an example, just has anyone any idea at this moment? Please tell me. A cultivation idea.
Meeting.
A meeting for?
For making decisions.
Okay, so title is decision-making meeting. We can draw a couple of figures sitting around a table. The challenge is to find decisions in a small group, and the solution is it's always a design sort of design recommendation. You formulate it as a design. Please, dear designer, it doesn't say so, but designer, create a place where people can meet to make up their decisions. That's all. It's pretty simple. But it's a pattern of cultivation. Okay? Another one could be a ritual, like reading a good night story here. That's a pattern for cultivation in raising a child, for example. It doesn't matter if you read whatever story you read, if you do it in bed, on the couch, whatever. That's the individual solution. But the pattern is reading a good night story for cultivation. Okay? You get the idea? We'll just try this out. I know this is not that easy. And I have lots of pens. And we'll make this really quick. I'll give you 6 minutes.
So we have an overarching design challenge, which is to design a neighborhood in Berlin where there are a lot of refugees arriving. And our aim for the next 3 years is to recreate that new neighborhood. So we were thinking about what were or are rituals in that neighborhood. So neighborhood rituals, that's our pattern.
That's a wonderful pattern. Neighborhood rituals. I mean, you all know them, hopefully. You once or twice have lived in, or even do live in a neighborhood who has that. Sonja and I are very lucky to live in a neighborhood with many neighborhood rituals. For example, we have something like
the ice challenge.
The ice challenge every year. There's a lake, and we have a bet if there is ice or no ice on the lake, and it's on the 5th of January, and the losers will have to care for beer and sausages and all this kind of stuff. That's maybe not a very innovative, but a neighborhood ritual. Yeah, nice pattern for cultivation. Does anyone else have a pattern for cultivation?
Timekeeping.
Yeah, I know. I'm 5 minutes late. Give me another 5 minutes.
I just joked about it, and Frankie said it really is a necessary pattern in any project. So it is within, you know, if you scale this up to 6 months, the timekeeping element is key.
So on every scale, timekeeping. Yeah. It needs someone who has an eye on it, focus again and again, brings the group together, reminds them on the time goals they've set themselves. Yeah, that's a pattern, a cultivation pattern.
I just wrote check-in. And what I mean by that is you might notice maybe in certain restaurants, for instance, every crew shift moment at the beginning, the staff and the manager sort of gathers in front of the restaurant and really a short pep talk. We also try sort of those type of things in some of our projects that are very volunteer driven and really will work wonders to create focus and team building on that very specific moment. Than to a routine.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. check in. Are there more cultivation patterns?
Pray.
To pray, yes, of course. Yeah. Do you have it on your sheet? Yeah.
Oh no, I wrote something else on the sheet. It's just
Okay. But you can write a sheet down. Yeah, to pray, of course, as a sort of spiritual ritual or a practice of focus, remind. Yeah, and your religion, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had the title here, Celebrate Your Work.
Yeah.
Because what I experience in my teams, but also when I'm observing other teams, you usually focus on what's missing or where you could improve. And is that maybe a solution could be to always be aware of the progress you're doing, looking back, reflecting, and build rituals of celebration.
Yes.
Which can be, but not necessarily are getting wasted, but it could also be just have moments of feedback and sharing what the progress you did, and also maybe going to the mountains to hike together and just celebrate, not always at the end of the year, but during the project.
Yes, thank you. Celebration as a pattern of cultivation.
Create a time
Yeah.
for expressing appreciation. Create a time and a space to express appreciation.
Yes.
To your colleagues, to people you work with.
Yeah. Wonderful. Those are lovely patterns. And if you have more, please, you can still post them tomorrow or this evening on this wall, so that we have what then is a pattern language, because you have now a lot of different patterns, and all these patterns together create a pattern language of cultivation. We can work on this now for a couple months and write a book, Patterns of Cultivation. And what happens now is, and this is the last bit, I'm just going into it very briefly because you're not going to work in your projects anymore tonight, but usually if you would do, what you do now is, if you have a pattern language of cultivation, you can now as designers go there for inspiration and pick those patterns which seem fit to your projects and order them or sort them in a sequence, so that you say, well, neighborhood rituals, timekeeping and celebrations, that should work for my project. And from there on, with these three patterns in mind, you'll find single solutions, these individual solutions, like the one Swedish house you can build for your project, which means the pattern neighborhood ritual, now you design a neighborhood ritual for the neighborhood you're working on, not for any other, a very specific neighborhood ritual. Or you go there and say, well, celebrate your work, you design a party for your project to celebrate the work of this project. Not any party, but the party for this project. A single individual design solution for your given context. So, and this is how these pattern languages work as a methodology. You have these patterns, and ideally, like Christopher Alexander and his teams, they found 260 patterns for city development. So, and now they can go to this pattern language, and for any given design challenge, they'll pick those patterns and use them as a sort of inspiration to find direct, individual, custom-made solution for a specific problem. And for cultivation, for example, in our institute, we call that codes. We write codes for every bit of cultivation we do. We write a code for our check-ins and check-outs. We write a code for our interns. If they get there, they get a code, an intern code. That's sort of their pattern, where everything is explained they need to know. We have a code how to label our folders on our server, for example, so that everyone who comes new to us can look at the code and can cultivate our company's culture by reading the code, asking a few questions, and it's a first easy step to get into cultivation for them by reading these codes. So these are the individual solutions. And if you have that, there's one last step to this framework. You can bring them into a procedure. Like you say, well, when we start our project, the first phase often is a sort of implementation phase. For example, and we'll introduce timekeeping and check-ins, but not as a pattern, but it's sort of this individual solution. We'll start with these two individual solutions. Then you have this really long phase of cultivation, and that is, I call that really routines, finding routines, like the everyday's life routines. And in contrast to this, what happening here, this is radical and fast. Of course, this is slow and incremental here. And you can introduce new codes for cultivation, one after another, because cultivation takes time. You can't just give them a set of 20 new things how to cultivate the project. You'll have to start with one, and then the next. And if that works, the next. And then you can sort of make these incremental designs. Here, find out they're not probably as perfect as you have designed them. So you change them, or the users change them. Over months, years, maybe 10 years, they slowly change their patterns. And in the end here, I like this, because it gets us out of the cultivation phase. This is sort of the radical systems critique. If you've done a project or if you've been in a team for 10 years, you just get fed up. You can't cope with it anymore, with all these patterns and rituals and all this sort of boring going on in cultivation. You're just fed up. And you think, this is nuts, I have to change something. And that's here, you're back here. Yeah? So you've gone all the way, you've done all your rituals and your everyday life for 10 years, and now something really has to change, and you start researching. You start to look for new patterns, for new whatever, and this cycles again and again. At least that's sort of the ideal model behind it. So thank you very much.